Welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for joining us. Well, the Auditor General of the state of Pennsylvania, Tim DeFoor, joins me. We're going to talk about protecting and saving your money. But first, let's get to the big stories of the week.
Welcome to the fast-paced and unrehearsed weekly discussion featuring the leaders who help shape your world. Join us as we address the issues that impact you each and every day. This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
All right, sitting across from me are two journalists who cover much about state government and state politics. Angela Couloumbis, she's with Spotlight PA, and Marc Levy, he's with the Associated Press. All right, Marc, I want to talk about something that has not been much in the news lately, and that is this year we're electing a Supreme Court justice. In this state, we elect the appeals courts, translation, Supreme, Superior, and Commonwealth. I will not get into the issue of whether we should be electing people that the voters basically don't know much about it. I've been arguing that for years. But having said that, what's the big issue now before the state Supreme Court?
Well, there's a few big issues. It does have a case on guns before it. The city of Philadelphia is challenging a law that prevents cities and counties from setting firearms policy. And there's another one that's a challenge to a state law that says you can't cover abortion with Medicaid money, and it's challenging that as unconstitutional. So these are two big cases that we could see decided this fall by the state Supreme Court. There's 6 justices now. It's a 7-seat court, as you mentioned. There's an open seat. We'll be electing someone to fill that seat in November. And
the Democrats have a majority on the Supreme Court as you and I speak, correct?
That's right, a 4-2 majority. And if they win in November, they'll have their 5-2 majority back that they lost when the Chief Justice, Max Baer, died last year.
Yeah. Do you agree that you've written stories about the appeals court elections in the past, that the voters just simply don't know very much about these candidates?
Look, the people who are in charge of trying to get voters to the polls, the Republicans and the Democrats and the activists all know this, that is very hard to get voters to pay attention during an odd year election. And they're worried about it, and it's, the turnout is often a fraction of what you see in presidential elections.
Yeah. And yet, this position is a very significant one. The court has historically made very impactful decisions in the state. It has ruled on redistricting. It has ruled on major election cases. So that is one of the messages that some of the advocates are trying to get out, that this is an incredibly impactful on-your-life election.
Okay, well, let's stay with you and talk a little bit about an ongoing state budget debate. I think most of us thought the budget was done, it was over. We won't go through any more budget talks until next year, but that's not happening.
Right. So the main budget bill was signed into law by Governor Shapiro. However, you cannot have a complete budget in Pennsylvania without supplemental budget bills that go along with it, and those are the ones that are hanging in the balance, and there's about $1 billion. Again, that is hanging in the balance, and the problem is the Senate is slated to come in next week to start resolving some of these issues, but it's unclear as we sit here today whether there is buy-in from the Democratic-controlled House on what the Senate is going to do.
Right.
And there could be other issues, very controversial ones, that come into play as they try and resolve this.
And the bottom line is, the House, the Democrats had a 1-seat majority. Now they do not anymore. I mean, it's up for grabs given the nature of the deep division between the D's and the R's in the Pennsylvania House of Representatives.
Right. So the Senate has a strong Republican majority. The House has a 102, 101 Democratic majority, but every time someone leaves, then the Democratic majority is gone, and they have to wait for a special election to come back when they get their majority back. So right now it's 101, 101. September 19th, there is a special election to fill a seat. odds are that a Democrat will be elected.
It's a Democratic seat, as you
They'll
say.
get their majority back, and presumably they'll come back into session after that. But that doesn't change the fact that House Democratic leadership and Senate Republican leadership have really been at odds over a lot of things.
Well, something that's been in the news lately is malfunctioning voting machines. You know, we all cast votes, and we're not going to get into whether votes were miscounted or there was fraud in the election. We'll let former President Donald J. Trump weigh in on that. But let's run to a break, and we want to talk about what the Shapiro administration has agreed to do about malfunctioning voting machines.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania State Education Association, bringing the power of a great education to our schools, our students, and our communities. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Highway Information Association, the go-to source to learn about transportation projects and issues. Please visit pahighwayinfo.org. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Well, something we all have an interest and care about, and that is our voting machines. They were a subject of considerable debate, particularly, as I pointed out earlier, by Donald J. Trump and some people in his campaign. So what's going to happen with malfunctioning voting machines? Let me turn to Angela Couloumbis. So what's the story with them?
So there was a settlement in a case not related to Donald J. Trump, involving counties now will have to report malfunctions to the state, all malfunctions on their voting machines starting this November. And the idea behind it, obviously, is to provide more accountability, to provide explanations for things that happen, and inevitably they do. In many cases, like in years past, you will have election officials on election night come out and say, yes, we had some issues, but overall nothing impacted voting or the results of voting. But now you will have a documentation of each and every instance and how the county handled it and what kind of problem came up, and again, you know, how it was resolved. The hope is that it will tamp down any kind of conspiracy theories about elections being rigged. You know, there is a small camp that thinks that that could be taken advantage of by people who want to, you know, cast doubt on election security. Yeah. But overall, it is, and you know, advocates are calling it a win for transparency.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, we had this big debate over mail-in balloting and the signatures that went on the outside of the envelope. Is that going to return as an issue, you think, as we approach the election? Obviously, we have what we call, wrongly, I think, off-year elections, but these are very important elections for state, you know, for the state courts, for lots of local officials who literally control much of our lives in the municipalities, the counties, as well as the cities and boroughs and townships.
Yeah, there is still pending litigation over signatures on ballots and dates on ballots. It's not on a timeline that it looks like it would affect this election. It could be on a timeline to be resolved and affect the 2024 presidential election. But sometimes litigation also pops up after an election if there is a dispute about what is getting counted and what isn't getting counted. And the 2019 mail-in voting law introduced a whole bunch of gray areas and glitches in the law that were unforeseen about whether a ballot should be counted. Did the person sending it in, did they sign it? Did they date it? Did they include the secrecy envelope? And there's been disputes over whether you should be throwing out someone's ballot because they didn't do that, even though they're a legal eligible voter and they cast a legal eligible ballot. Other than the fact.
So the point is, if you didn't properly put a signature and a date on the outer envelope, some counties sent, got in contact with the people and said, you missed the date, put the date down. This gets complicated for the average voter, but your point is that folks are saying because you didn't put a date or sign an outer envelope, that doesn't mean that your vote shouldn't be counted, right?
It has no effect on the fact of whether you're legally registered to vote and whether your ballot is a legitimate ballot.
All right, before I let you go, let's turn to the state police, back to the state police and the Supreme Court and how social media gets monitored.
Well, again, this involves litigation, and the state Supreme Court just this week issued a ruling that said that the state police cannot hide or redact large portions of its policy on how it tracks people's social media usage. And again, it's one of these things that the state police had argued that it's a necessary tool for them to have and also to keep secret so that people can't find ways around their tracking. On the other hand, it is a huge win for transparency, and it'll be interesting to see if the state police, what it puts out and how it puts it out.
This seems to, Mark, be something that's very, very, very controversial.
That's not clear to me. We may know a lot more when we actually see the policy. The only copy of it that was accessed was heavily redacted.
Right.
And so the majority on the court set was able to view the policy behind closed doors and said this is largely administrative and internal and has no effect on investigations, and that's why it should be public.
All right, we're going to now turn to the Auditor General of the state of Pennsylvania. Is our money being properly spent? He's going to help us understand his job, how he makes sure that it is.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Cross-State Credit Union Association. Credit unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, go to ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Association of Pennsylvania State College and University Faculties, representing the faculty and coaches who are devoted to providing quality public higher education for Pennsylvania's college students.
All right, joining me now is Tim DeFoor. He is the Pennsylvania Auditor General. He's a statewide elected official with a 4-year term. General DeFoor, welcome to the program. Thanks for coming back.
Dr. Madonna, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for your viewers for watching. All
right, well, let's start with it. Tell the folks out there, what does the Auditor General do? And you only have 2 minutes to do it.
I can do it a lot less than that. My job is to make sure that their tax dollars are being spent the way they're supposed to by, number one, auditing the state funds, making sure that the tax dollars are being spent appropriately, and making sure that when our tax dollars are paying for programs, that those programs are running efficiently and running the way that they're supposed to. And we do that, of course, by performing audits. And we make recommendations. If there are any findings, we make common sense, solid recommendations, not only to the governor, but also to the legislature.
Yeah. So how many people, so you have employees of your office going out and auditing the books, the records, if you will, of folks in statewide bureaus and departments?
Correct. Wherever state funds are being spent and being utilized. And we have auditors across the state. And we have auditors in the center of the state and also in every corner of the state performing these audits to make sure that our tax dollars are being spent correctly.
I want to talk about the big investigations that you're doing, but first let's talk about something that you've been promoting in press releases, and that is modernizing the department. What's that mean?
Think of it this way. Think of it as continued process improvement. One of the things that we've done, we realized that we've always looked to the private sector to be, let's say, innovators. And it's, state government, we have innovators amongst us. So one of the things that we needed to do, we needed to think of ways to improve the department. How can we be more efficient with regards to the way that we're performing audits, but also how can we be more efficient with regards to what we are doing internally? And we're preparing not only for today, but also for the next 20 years. So we've become innovators and critical thinkers with regards to our approach internally and also how we perform audits. And what does that look like? It looks like making sure that our employees have all the tools that they need to do their jobs. And that means internally that we have technology, the proper technology in order to
and that's been changing.
That has been changing.
Huge changes.
And we're keeping up with that, making sure that we have the proper technology to do our jobs. Also, making sure that we recruit and retain qualified personnel. And we've talked about our intern to hire program. We visited all 14 PASSE schools and all 4 state-related schools, including Lincoln and Cheney, or historically black colleges, recruiting qualified personnel.
Right.
And it also looks like how we are transforming how we are doing our audits. And what that means is we are looking at what are the things that are most at risk with regards to Pennsylvania government and our tax dollars. Where are our vulnerabilities? So we're looking at our vulnerabilities, we're looking at our risk, and we're auditing based on that.
Mm-hmm. And this process is ongoing.
This process is ongoing, and as far as the improvements, this is something that's going to constantly happen. Because one of the things, we understand that things may be fine today, but they could change in another couple of years. So when those changes come about, we don't want to be caught off guard. So we constantly have to be monitoring, okay, are we being efficient, and do we have the best practices in place in order to do our job?
All right, we're going to run to a break. When we come back, I'm going to ask the Auditor General about the big investigations that have been done in the recent past or are now ongoing. Back after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by the Pennsylvania Medical Society. Inspired physicians committed to the good health of Pennsylvanians and the advancement of the practice of medicine.
All right, welcome back. All right, General DeFoor, the big investigations. Take it.
Well, there's a lot of them. We recently had the school reserve audit. Prior to that, we talked about the Turnpike, and then prior to that, we talked about the DCED shutdown, business waiver shutdown during the pandemic. And
You mean companies that shut down, whether they should have or should not have shut down?
That's correct, and we audited the process. And when we perform these audits, we perform them in a way that's get right to the point. And it's pretty much just the facts. And that's one of the things that I'm most thankful for with regards to the staff that we have. We don't play got you politics with regards to the audits that we perform. We've taken a quality management approach with regards to our audits. And what that means is basically we look at what the issues are pertaining to this audit. If there's any recommendations, we offer sound recommendations without being accusatory, without attacking somebody, and we also have common sense approaches. And we've done that with all the audits that we've performed so far, and all the audits we're going to be doing going in the future.
All right, push to shove. Does it sometimes, either with you or previous Auditor Generals, lead to prosecution?
A lot of them do. And we unfortunately, there are some cases where that does happen. And in cases where, let's say with regards to our volunteer fire audits, where you may have one person responsible for all the funds for a volunteer fire relief associations. A lot of times we see fraud, not with all of them, but there are several cases where we do in fact see fraud, and those are often referred to the local district attorney. And one of the things that we also always recommend in an instance like that is, as opposed to having one person be responsible for the funds, have several persons
Yeah.
responsible for the funds, because people.
They can monitor each other.
Exactly. So that's one of the things that we often recommend, but
Yeah.
that's an ongoing problem that we're starting to see. It's increasing.
Is there some area of the economy that's more prevalent in your investigations?
With regards to finding fraud,
Yeah.
it's probably that. A lot of the smaller communities. However, one of the things that we always do, whenever we identify any type of fraud in any of our audits, and auditing is always the first line of defense when you're talking about audits. So when we see fraud, a couple things that we do. We refer it to law enforcement, whether it's a local DA or whether it's the Attorney General's office, and they'll say one of three things. They'll say, well, if there's not enough there, and kick it back to us. They'll say, well, let's work on this together.
Okay.
Or they'll say, well, you know what? We have something here. Cease and desist. We got it from here.
Okay. So it does get complicated.
It does get complicated, and that's where you have to have the experienced people come in, and you have to have all the facts with regards to what's going on in that particular issue.
All right, as a lifelong college professor who's dealt with a lot of the folks I'm going to mention, interns on the job.
Yes, our intern to hire program. So one of the things that we noticed a couple of years ago is that we were losing staff. Staff was retiring left and right. And it's the same with a lot of other state departments. So we're thinking about what's the best way to attract new staff and also to attract interns. So, and I have to give all the credit to our workforce development team who came with this idea of intern to hire. And basically what that is that if you are on track to graduate with 12 credits of accounting or 12 credits of IT, then you qualify for our intern to hire program. Right. And which means that if you intern with us 900 hours, which is the equivalent of 2 summers, or you could do it throughout the school year.
Right.
Once you graduate with those 12 credit hours of accounting or with 12 credit hours of IT, you're going to have a job. So we held a press conference at Temple University and with the Chancellor of PASSHE. We visited all 14 state-related universities, including the 2 historically black colleges, Lincoln and Cheney, and we also visited all 4 state-related universities. And one of the things that we discovered, this program, this intern to hire program, has been so successful since we implemented it. In November of 2021, we have actually had more interns apply for that program than we actually have employees.
Thanks for the update, and thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you.
All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers. Actually, I think we're preempted next week, but we'll get back to you the week after that. Thank you.